means I lead a team of people who provide professional development opportunities for our faculty and staff. And we do workshops and certificate programs and a variety of offerings on things like communication and customer service and leadership and organizational development and team building. And one of the areas that we provide quite a few workshops in relates to time management. And so I'm pleased to be able to offer you some time management tips today. I know that none of you would be where you are if you didn't already have some great time management tools in your tool belt. But I also know that if you're anything like me, I've reached points in my career where I feel like I'm using the tools I have and I've maxed them out and I need some new tools. Or sometimes I actually will use some sort of tool and then somehow it falls off my radar and I stop using it. So I hope today that you will maybe come across a tool that you forgot that you used to have in your tool belt that you can refresh and bring back, or you might find something in this content that is actually new to you and could be useful. So where we're headed today is that we're going to look at a little bit about why time management is important. Then we're going to explore some of the common challenges that we really all have related to managing our time effectively. We're going to identify some techniques for keeping the most common time wasters to the curb. We'll also learn a simple model for prioritizing tasks. It's a simple model, but I think it's pretty powerful for a lot of people. And then my ultimate goal is I hope that as we're going through this content, that you will identify one goal for yourself, one goal for either improving or expanding your time management. Because what we know about how adults learn is that if we don't get really specific, and I know some of you are familiar with the SMART goals model, if we don't create goals that are detailed and specific, we often don't achieve them. So as we're going through this content, I hope that you will identify at least one thing that you want to put into practice as soon as you get out of this webinar. So why does time management matter? Well, the first reason that it matters that I've got on here has to do with the fact that it reduces our stress. And I think all of you know the difference between a day that feels like you've managed your time well and a day that you haven't. And typically the day when you feel like you've managed your day well feels a lot better. It also increases our productivity. If you're anything like me, your job's not staying the same, and you are being asked often to do more with the same amount of time and resources. And in order to increase productivity, we have to really be paying attention to our minutes and getting the most out of them. When we manage our time well, we actually can find some better balance within all of our competing priorities. And ultimately, when we manage our time well, we can reach our most important goals. And I think all of us have layers of goals in our lives. You know, we have goals at work, but we also have goals in our personal life. And the nice thing about working on your time management skills at work is they also apply in your personal life. And so I really enjoy that aspect of the work that my department does here at JMU, is because our employees get to come to us to work on a variety of skills that of course benefit them at work, because that's why my department exists, but it also benefits them in their personal life. And then this last bullet might be a little bit surprising when you're talking about time management, that I'm going to all of a sudden add, allow you to take on more opportunities. But I really feel like we have to be very conscious of what we're saying yes to and what we're saying no to. And sometimes we have to manage our time well, say no to certain things so that we can say yes to the opportunities that are most important to us. So those are a few reasons that I think time management matters. It's not an exhaustive list, but I hope you'll agree with that. And next here, we've got a big stack of money. And I wish that I could give you all $86,400, but alas, you'll just have to settle for this slide. Imagine that you were given $86,400 and you were told that you had to spend it today on anything that you want. But that's really the catch, is that you have to spend it today. At the end of the day, you can't save any of it. And think about for a second, what would you do if you had $86,400? I've heard lots of answers to this question. Everything from I would pay the tuition for my students going to college, to I would pay off a mortgage, to I would take a fancy vacation. So I've heard lots of different things. I've heard I would give money to charity, but you have to give it all away. And the reason I do this exercise when I do workshops is that the reality is every day we get 86,400 seconds to spend, and we get to spend them any way we want, but we don't get to carry over any of that time. And a lot of people say that how we spend our money is a lot like how we spend our time. And are we spending our time wisely? Are we investing our time in the right things? And are we putting our precious time towards things that are going to pay off for us in the long run? So 86,400 seconds. Hopefully today you're going to walk away with a couple ideas of how to put some of those seconds to extra good use. Next, I've got a list of some personal time challenges, and I'm betting that most of you are going to relate to some of these, if not all of these. The first bullet there I've got is cell phones and personal email and Facebook and other social media. You know, sometimes we enjoy our family and friends, but when it's during the workday, Facebook and other things that, especially those little reminders that pop up, can be pretty seductive and pulling us away from the work we're trying to get done. But then you'll also notice I have work email. Work email can present a significant challenge, particularly depending on the culture of the organization that you work in. In my organization, because JMU is pretty large, I mean, for the Shenandoah Valley, we're large. We have a variety of different departments on campus. We have about 4,500 employees. And depending on the department you're in, the culture can be different regarding email. And there are many pockets on our campus where the expectation is that you basically respond to all work emails instantly. And that can create some challenges for folks when they're trying to get work done on larger projects. The next bullet there, procrastination. That's kind of self-explanatory, but it can definitely get us into some time crunches. Then the inability to say no. There's a variety of reasons that people don't say no. It can range from everything from being dependent on who the request comes from and feeling like you can't say no, to being worried that if you say no to this opportunity, then you won't be offered another opportunity. Next there, we've got the thrill of busyness. And if you are a person who enjoys the thrill of busyness, you probably know who you are. There's a certain kind of energy and excitement that can come with kind of being pressed and having lots of demands on you that require you to be busy. Next there, I've made a note about not taking breaks and not managing our energy well. Often we feel like we are under the gun with the deadline, and so we stop doing those things that we would typically do to take care of ourselves, whether that's taking our lunch break or taking a walk around the building to give ourselves a bit of a break. But we actually end up kind of ends up backfiring on us because we aren't doing those little things that we do to renew ourselves and to keep ourselves better able to focus and on task. And then that last one, just feeling overwhelmed. If I ask for a show of hands, I'm seeing right now that there's 58 people on this call. I am betting that the majority of you can relate to that moment where you come in and you sit down to do work and you have so many things that you need to do that you're actually immobilized and you're not sure where to start because you're feeling so overwhelmed. I actually have a tactic that I came across when I was doing some research developing this content, and I'm going to share that with you a little later on, but it's been very helpful for me on those days when I'm feeling really overwhelmed and feeling like I can't get the momentum I need to get started. All right, now I'm going to talk about some more personal time challenges. Chronic reactivity, that's when you get yourself stuck in a state where you're never able to be proactive enough, that you're always in a position of having to react. Doesn't feel very good. When we don't set goals and we don't prioritize our tasks, when we don't schedule our tasks or we schedule them ineffectively, one of the things we're going to talk about is it actually is important to pay attention to both organizational productivity trends during the week as well as our own productivity and energy levels throughout the week. That next one, failure to delegate. When we get ourselves stuck in a place where there isn't enough cross-training to have somebody to be able to delegate to, or sometimes we just can't let go of a task because we know we're going to do it better, or at least we think we will. Next there, we've got disorganization and information overload. Most of us have still lots of paper and lots of electronic things coming at us. Maybe some of your environments are purely electronic, but for us, I know at JMU, we still have, not a ton of paper coming at us, but we still have some paper coming at us. And then the last bullet here is perfectionism. Sometimes we get ourselves stuck because we feel like what we produce has to be absolutely perfect, and we don't discriminate between projects where good enough is okay and projects where it really is required to be perfect. And I know in a profession like yours, I'm betting that there's a pretty high amount of perfectionism that's required. But if you were hard pressed, you might be able to identify some things that you could get done to a good enough level, and that would be okay, especially if it meant you weren't burning yourself out. And here's some external time challenges. These are time challenges that are outside of yourself, and some of them look similar to some of the things we've already talked about, but you'll notice the first two bullets are similar: interruptions or small talk initiated by other people. So sometimes our time challenges are things that we have less control over. Crises that pop up based on things that are going on in the office. I know many of you can relate to your perfectly timed out day. You've got it all scheduled in your Outlook calendar or your Google calendar, and then the next thing you know, a crisis pops up and that schedule is out the window. Then urgent emails or urgent conversations, those things that just can't wait. Unclear priorities and goals, and we've already talked about this from a personal perspective, but when an organization or a department or a team has unclear priorities and unclear goals, unclear ideas of what are the most important tasks on our plates and how should we all be working towards those, that can create time challenges. And then next here we've got meetings. unnecessary meetings, meetings that aren't run well, and meetings that don't start and end on time. And, you know, truthfully, that could be a whole nother webinar just on how to have efficient meetings. But we all need to remember, particularly those of us who are in charge of scheduling meetings, that we need to be careful how much time in any given day is being blocked out in meetings and keeping people from working on the most important and strategic tasks that they have. All right, I'm always a little hesitant to bring this up because it really is a myth, the myth of multitasking. So don't shoot the messenger, but the reality is that current neuroscience really does say that we can't multitask. Whether we're typing an email while we're talking on the phone or responding to emails during a meeting, the reality is our brain can't focus. It can't focus on more than one thing at a time. And I think the current trend in a huge number of increases in accidents related to cell phones and driving is a really good example of how sometimes people think that multitasking can happen and it actually really can't. But what does happen is something called switch tasking. So our brains actually are able to switch back and forth very quickly, sometimes not quickly enough, like in that last example that I gave. But what we think we're doing simultaneous things, we're really not. We're actually switching back and forth at a high rate of speed. The trick there is, though, every time we switch our focus from one task to the other, the reality is that there's a toll that we pay. There's a toll for mental energy, physical energy. There's actually a tiny little time toll that we pay. And then usually for most of us, our accuracy suffers. So if you're anything like me, I get a lot of things coming across my desk that needs proofreading. And what I notice is if I don't kind of turn away from my computer and ignore my phone, there's no way that I'm actually going to be able to make sure that the document that I'm looking at is going to be accurate. And so the good news is, if we can't really multitask and what we're doing is switch tasking, the other thing that this neuroscience research is bearing out is that when we focus on one thing at a time, we often end up doing it better, so we end up with higher quality work. We often do it faster, and we end up using less energy because we're not paying that energy toll of switching back and forth. So to me, that is really that's the real golden nugget there for this, is if you can find ways to focus on one task at a time, you're actually going to end up maximizing your minutes and producing better quality work. But I tell you, don't be the one to stand up in front of a group of millennials and tell them that we really can't multitask, because I've done it before. Okay, quick little quiz for yourself. Take a look at these items and figure out if you think they're true or false. Putting things off to the last minute is most effective for some people. Doing the pleasant tasks first helps with procrastination. And starting poorly is better than not starting at all. All right, well, that first one, putting things off to the last minute is most effective for some people. All right, I'm betting maybe not everybody agrees with me on this, but if you do a lot of reading and time management, what you'll find is that while people can produce good work at the last minute, they can do it. So I'm not saying you can't do it. We can do it. The reality is we often produce work that is even better if we don't put things off until the last minute. So it's not that we can't produce work that's good, but we can often produce work that's even better if we don't put it off. And then the other thing is we don't end up being as stressed out. if we are actually working towards our goals at a little more consistent pace and a less frantic pace. Doing the pleasant task first helps with procrastination. I don't know about you, but I still get sucked in on this one. But the reality is that's not true, because if we do all the things that we like first, we're still left with those tasks that we've been dreading. And it actually can create a bit of a backlash for us because we don't have any of the fun stuff or the things that we really enjoy left. And then last, starting poorly is better than not starting at all. And that's actually true. And I struggle with that one because sometimes I don't want to start until I feel like I have, every little duck in a row. But I do believe this, and it's kind of funny. When I was growing up, my dad would use this expression that I swear to you I did not understand until, I don't know, I probably was 35, and he was using this when I was probably 7 or 8. But he used to say, when we would be doing some kind of project together and I wasn't starting, he would say, do something even if it's wrong. And I heard it enough, but I didn't really understand. What he was saying is, if you start, you'll have some momentum, and even if you do it wrong and you have to redirect that momentum, you're going to end up in a better spot than if you didn't start at all. And so for me, when I see that starting poorly is better than not starting at all, I remind myself that I should do something, even if it's wrong, even if it's not perfect. Even if I have to redo or readjust, having that momentum moving forward is going to be better than not having any momentum at all. So, why do we not start on things? Well, there's a lot of reasons that we as human beings procrastinate, even though we know we shouldn't. And most of us, if we're honest with ourselves, can identify at least a couple of things that we're prone to procrastinating on. And some of the common reasons are listed here. Fear of failure. Sometimes it's hard to get started when we're not sure that we're going to be successful. Also, sometimes we procrastinate when we are setting a standard of perfection that might not be achievable. I have a friend, a very productive friend here on campus, but she will admit to you that one of her problems is she'll get like literally 98% done with a project, and then she stalls and she kind of goes into this obsessive mode of checking and rechecking and thinking about how things are laid out and the formatting, and she really gets herself stuck just in that last little bit because she's got this perfection standard, and she can lose her momentum. And now that she has identified that, she's trying not to do that, but it's definitely something that she has to be aware of. Sometimes we don't get started because we don't have something that we need to do it, so we don't have the resource, or we don't have a skill that we need, and so we put it off because we don't know how to do the project. So if you're using Excel and this project's going to require you to use pivot tables and you haven't used pivot tables in a while, or you've never used them at all, you might put off starting that project because you don't have that skill. And sometimes we put off a task just because we don't like it. I'm pretty sure if I opened up a chat discussion, you all could come up with a variety of tasks that you don't like to do, and so you procrastinate them. The reality is, I've never met anybody who loved every single task associated with their job, no matter how much they love their job. And then you'll notice I've got a bullet under there, shiny things, and I feel like when we have a task that we really don't like and we don't want to do, we are extra prone to all the shiny things in our life, whether that is checking that photo that we posted on Facebook one more time to see how many likes we have now, or walking down the hall to see if Judy has any new candy in her candy dish. I think those shiny things can pull us away easily when we don't like a task. And that last bullet there, low energy and poor focus. Sometimes we procrastinate because we use up all of the energy that we need to start a project before we actually get to that project. So we sometimes schedule a task at a time in the day when we don't have a lot of energy, or we're not as focused, and then when we go to start that task, it can make it difficult for us to get going. So that's not an exhaustive list of sources of procrastination, and you might have some that you would add yourself, but those are some pretty common reasons that we procrastinate on our tasks. So next, now that we know a little bit about some of the reasons that we procrastinate, I have some ideas that I have seen be helpful for kicking procrastination to the curb. And the first one is one that I know everybody's going to be familiar with. Plan every day in advance and stick to the plan. All right, now I know that's easier said than done. Urgent things pop up, crises pop up, but the quicker that we can recognize that we want to get back to our plan, the better. And so when you catch yourself moving a task on your Outlook calendar, like that task, you move it from Monday to Tuesday to Wednesday, you need to pay attention to that. The next one is the 2 to 5 minute rule. And I put 2 to 5 minute because if you look in the literature, you'll see people reference 2-minute rule and a 5-minute rule. What that means is if there's any task that only requires 2 minutes of effort or 5 minutes of effort, don't touch it again, just do it. So if you open that email and it's only going to take you 2 minutes, respond to it. Don't close it and open it 3 more times without responding to it. I certainly don't know anything about doing that. Oh wait, I just did that today. Put pressure on yourself. How do you do that? Make yourself accountable to a colleague or set up a reward for yourself. So sometimes if I'm procrastinating on a task, I will go across the hall to one of my colleagues and I will say, look, I'm working on the content for such and such workshop. I'm having trouble getting momentum and I want to get this far by 2 o'clock. Would you mind sticking your head in periodically or at least once and ask me if I'm staying on task? Kind of artificial, but it works. Or set up a reward for yourself, whether that's making a Starbucks run or going outside and get a little sunshine and walking around the building. Tell yourself, all right, when I get this done, I'm going to get that little reward. I also like something called a hodgepodge hour because I feel like sometimes we procrastinate because we don't have a lot of energy. And a hodgepodge hour is basically where you take a bunch of little tasks that you need to get done and get off your desk, and you just take that hour to just knock some of those things out. And when you get to the end of the hour, it can feel really good, and you can have some of that momentum for that task that you've been procrastinating on. And then this I'm sure some of you have used before. Trick yourself into gaining some momentum by only working on that terrible task that you don't want to do for 30 minutes. And usually if you make yourself work on something for 30 minutes, you find that you can keep going. All right, next. Everybody's got to-do lists. Sometimes they can get really long and overwhelming, and there are a variety of tools that I use to manage my to-do list, but there's one, and it's got kind of a corny name, but it's memorable, and I find it very helpful, and it's called Eat That Frog. And it actually comes from the name. It's actually, there's a book, and you can check that out, but it actually comes from a Mark Twain quote. He once said that if the first thing you do each morning is eat a live frog, you can go through the day with the satisfaction of knowing that is probably the worst thing that's going to happen to you all day long. And so from that quote, this Eat That Frog technique got its name. So if you have to eat a live frog at all, and your live frog would be like your biggest, gnarliest task that you have ahead of you that you're not really looking forward to, it doesn't pay to sit around to look at it for very long. And if you have to eat 2 frogs, you might as well eat the ugliest one first. So consider that frog being your most important, biggest task, the thing that's going to have the most influence over your productivity, that thing that you're putting off. Make sure that you are paying attention to that frog and eating that frog first. And along with this method, there's a model of ABCDE where you actually label your tasks. A is a very important task, B is an important task, C is a nice to do, but probably not necessary, D is something you need to delegate, and E is something you can eliminate. I think it's really important that we look around for processes that need to be sunsetted, things that we've been doing just because that's how we do them. So I think there are more things that we can eliminate than we might recognize at first glance. Delegating is important, cross-training is important, finding what your resources are for delegation. And then that top of the list, I think it's really important to make sure that we're actually spending the majority of our time on A tasks. I think that we can sidetrack ourselves and find ourselves stuck in some, say, C tasks, where they're nice to do tasks, but they're not actually bringing us the reward that we need at the end of the day. All right, so ABCD. For me, I facilitate a lot of workshops and I know a lot of content, but this is actually something that I regularly use. I'm going to throw a couple of rules at you really quickly. The 80-20 rule, I'm sure some of you know this already, but the 80-20 rule basically says that 20% of our efforts result in 80% of our results. And so when you're looking at that eat that frog model, that 20% you need to be paying attention to. What are the 20% of your tasks that when you put your energy there, you're actually getting your 80% of results? Another quick rule is if you don't have time to create an agenda for a meeting, you probably shouldn't have the meeting. Just something to think about. The rule of saying no. Your time is your most valuable resource, so sometimes if you are keeping your most important priorities ahead of you and you're working proactively on really important work, not just urgent things, you figure out that there are some things that you have to say no to. And that last bullet there, if you don't have the authority to say no, because sometimes you get asked to do something and you don't feel like you have the authority, I think you can open up a conversation about how do you prioritize your tasks. And then that third bullet, if you're terrible at saying no, you got to practice. You've got to find ways to start saying no to small things that you feel comfortable saying no to so that you can get more comfortable saying no to the big things. Information overload. I'm sure all of us have had days where we looked a little bit like that. Well, what causes it? I don't have to tell you. Information coming from a lot of places. Computers, telephones, fax machines, and believe it or not, we still have some stuff coming at us on fax machines here. We've got information coming at us all day, every day, and if we don't have a really good system for sorting, storing, or trashing it, we can easily get overloaded. So how do you tame your information overload? You got to give yourself permission to not know everything. And I know that can be scary, but you have to figure out what do you need to know, and you need to know it really well, and you have to figure out what you don't need to know. And I know here at JMU, I get lots of emails about a lot of things. I can't possibly know everything that's going on here. I'm a big fan of scan, recycle, or trash it. Don't keep paper if you don't have to. And then I'm sure some of you have a reading file where you have some material that's relevant and interesting, but it's not necessarily urgent. You can keep those in paper or electronically for those times when you have a little bit of downtime. If you've got something and you need to, you have to touch it, you should make the decision right away. All right, I've got this document that just came in. Who do I need to refer it to? Because I'm not the right person. Or can I act on it? Can I deal with it and then file it and be done with it, or can I actually throw it away? And I think for some of us, if you surveyed my small team of 5 people, you'd find very interesting different definitions of what you can throw away, but I lean on the side of you can throw a lot away. Do you have to read that? I really found it helpful when I came across this 3 different types of reading: scanning, reading, and studying. Scan headlines, captions, bold print. That's, you get the gist of something. Reading is actually reading every word in an article from start to finish. And then studying is that really kind of deep reading that you do where you highlight and underline and you make notes and you summarize key points. When you recognize what level of reading you need, that can help you get through your stack quicker. I'm a big fan of the rule of touch it once, and it's similar to that rule of 2 to 5 minutes. If you can only touch a task once, that's best. And so when you open that email and it only takes you a little bit to respond to it, deal with it. Because if you close it and open it up and close it and open it up, you're not maximizing your minutes. And here's my little overwhelm to overdrive tip that I wanted to give you. So this is for those times when you are sitting at your desk and you are overwhelmed and you don't know where to start. I came across this technique. It's a guy named Peter Bregman. He does a good bit of writing for the Harvard Business Review, and he developed this technique, and you need about an hour to put it into play. And the first thing you do when you're feeling overwhelmed is you make a list of everything that you need to do. So you take about 5 minutes and you make your list of everything that you've got going on. Next, you literally set a timer for 15 minutes and you spend 15 minutes completing the easiest tasks on your list. The low-hanging fruit, the little things that you need to knock out, and you take the 15 minutes, and when the timer goes off, you immediately switch, set your timer for 35 minutes, and you spend 35 minutes on your most daunting task. Whatever on your list is the most difficult thing for you to accomplish, 35 minutes on that. When you get done and the 35 minutes is up, you take a break for 10 minutes. I know it sounds easy, but when you're stuck, it can be easy to forget techniques like this. And I really find that for me, if I do this, when I get to the end of the 35 minutes, I will often just keep working on that daunting task because I got my momentum back. But I will say one caveat is don't get stuck in number 2. If you are having fun with all that low-hanging fruit, it can be tempting to be like, oh, I'm just going to keep working on the little stuff. But I really caution you against that and make sure that you dive in on your daunting task. The last thing I want to spend just a teeny bit of time talking about is our time and energy. The reality is all of us have different productivity cycles, different energy levels. And so for some people like me, I'm a morning person. I come in ready to go. And I would say mid-afternoon, I have kind of a lull, and then I get a little energy again towards the end of the day. Whatever your energy cycle is, you need to know what it is, because you need to make sure that you're prioritizing your tasks appropriately. You want to make sure that new learning or complex tasks are being scheduled at times that you have a lot of natural energy. Then those times when you have kind of an average amount of energy, you can schedule a lot of things, most activities, but not the most complex things that you do. And then pay attention to schedule your routine activities and meetings at times when you have below average energy. And then for low energy times, make sure you're doing really easy things, like maybe that's when you tackle a few things from your reading file, or you do some organizing or straightening up. And then this last piece is has to do with kind of your organizational productivity trends, meaning when they look at people across organizations, most organizations have people come in on Monday, and you watch that productivity ramp up through Monday, and then Tuesday and Wednesday, you start to peak in your productivity, And by Wednesday, it starts to go down. Thursday, you're still pretty productive, but by Friday, you're kind of coasting into the weekend. And so when you're scheduling things, you want to consider that. On Monday, energy starts out low coming out of the weekend, but ramps up pretty quickly. Schedule low demand tasks right away to allow people to do those while their energy is coming up. Make sure you're taking advantage of the peak energy and tackling the most difficult problems and tasks on Tuesday and Wednesday. Thursday, as energy begins to ebb for people, you want to schedule meetings, and especially schedule meetings where consensus is needed. And that is because by Thursday, most of us are not quite as spunky as we were on Tuesday and Wednesday. And so it can be easier to come to consensus on a Thursday, believe it or not. And then on Friday, make sure that you're scheduling the lowest energy work. So open-ended work, long-term planning, routine things. That's a great day for relationship building and networking, because those are just days where we're not getting as much done on a lot of our tasks. So here's some ways to consider managing your energy. Make sure you're taking breaks, and breaks look a little different for different people. Vary your mental and physical tasks. For me, you know, a physical task can be I go and I print a document to a printer that's far away because it gets me up from my desk on a day where I'm doing a lot of development at my computer. Make sure that you're eating food that fuels you and energizes you. For a lot of us, if we're getting more exercise, we actually have more energy. And then I'm sure you're all aware that getting sleep is really important, and aiming for that 7 or 8 hours of sleep, which I know is impossible at certain stages in our life for a lot of people. But when we're not getting enough sleep, it can be very difficult for us to manage our energy during the day. So I'm aware of the time, and so I've reached the end of my content, and I did want to open it up to see if there were any questions or comments. And at the same time, I'll say, I hope that you saw one thing in there that you might consider doing or kind of re-adopting as you walk away from this webinar today.
Okay, Jennifer, thank you very much. I don't know if you're able to see the chat box, but there is one question that's waiting for you there.
Okay, let's see. To complete easier tasks first, since that is typically. Well, I think that must have been relative to the slide more towards the beginning. I think that sometimes we can get sidetracked by the easier tasks. So I think when you are looking at, you know, time management research, I think that really relates to when you're doing a big project. Sure, you're going to have to do some of the smaller stuff first as kind of you're launching into the bigger stuff. But I think that's more talking about from a perspective of procrastination and getting things done. If we let ourselves only focus on the small things or the little things when we have something huge looming in front of us, that's not going to be as helpful. I think that's what that means. But then you've seen you can take advantage of your tiny tasks in that model that we learned for when we're getting stuck and we need to regain our momentum. You can actually take advantage of knocking some of those little tasks out. Any suggestions on dealing with a management team feels putting out, oh, wait, lost it. Feels putting out fires is the norm. Okay, that's a really good question. So when basically there's a culture of that's what we do, we put out fires. Truthfully, I think that we have to talk about that in our cultures. I think we have to open up the conversation to say, look, we actually are in this culture where we can't be as proactive as we would like to be, and we are putting out fires and we're kind of running from fire to fire. I think you have to talk about that with your supervisor, and I think you have to open up, like, I think organizations have to be willing to look at that culture in order to shift that away. And sometimes teams can be successful shifting out of that culture themselves, but sometimes they need the larger parts of the organization to look at that. And then I've got somebody that says, to complete my task on time, I let my boss know an estimate time of completion, and that is motivation for me. That's perfect. So if your boss didn't give you a deadline, but then you give your boss the deadline, that's great, because you know you're still working towards that deadline. A deadline's a deadline. That's a great tip. Did I get them all, Norval? I think I did.
There's a couple more here. Somebody's asking, can you share the slides with us? Lots of improvement ideas, way more than one.
Yes, yes. I'm going to definitely send Norval a PDF of the slides. And my email is actually on the next slide. So if you have any questions, comments, or thoughts, feel free to reach out to me here at JMU.
And you also have a question, a couple more waiting. One of them is from Peter Blattner. I don't know if you can see it or not.
Are frogs better eaten head first, tail first, or swallowed whole? You know, I think as long as you're eating the frog, that's the most important thing. And I actually did read a book once where someone ate a live frog because of a spiritual quest that he was on, and I found it hard to even actually read that passage. And then is there another one?
Yeah, Kyle has one too.
Okay, do these techniques work across all generations or groups? I would say that these techniques would work across all different types of people and work styles, but I also feel like not everything I've talked about today is going to resonate with everyone. So I do think, particularly that overwhelmed technique by Peter Bregman, I think that can work for a lot of different people. You just have to, if you're using it with a teenager, you'd have to structure it and help them understand that idea of momentum that they may not be getting, that's working behind the scenes there. But yeah, I think that they could be applicable. But I also want to say this is just a tiny little slice of what's out there related to time management. So I certainly don't want anybody to think that I've got the corner of the market or I've covered even more than just the surface of what's out there. And then I've got something that says, many people can state what can be done for effective time management, but how many do it? Well, that's a good question, because I don't know. If you're anything like me, I feel like there are certain times in my life where I hit my stride and I'm on top of the world and I think, oh, I'll never lose my balance again. Like, I've got this down. And then a month later, I'll go, oh, wow, I've lost sight of that technique that was helpful to me, and I need to reinstitute that. So I definitely think that for a lot of us, time management is something that we need to check in with ourselves on periodically. And that's actually, frankly, one of the reasons I like facilitating workshops on time management, because it keeps me on my toes. Because it's not like just because I facilitate and know some of this stuff that I put it into perfect practice every day.
Okay, that looks like that's probably the last question in the chat box. We're almost to the top of the hour here, so unless somebody has something that they want to get in here onto the wire, last thing I'll do here is remind everybody once again that our next webinar is Thursday of this week. It'll be on the 14th at noon Eastern Time, and it's value stream mapping with James Tate. So hopefully we'll see everybody there. Oh, there is one more question, Jennifer.
Oh, wow, that's a big question. I'm sure that there are. That's not something that I specifically looked at the research on, and I'm sure that there are differences in that, but I couldn't speak to them on the fly today. It has to do with, are there any differences between high performers and low performers? And that would definitely be true, but yeah. I definitely think in order to keep myself in a high performing range, I have to be paying attention to maximizing my minutes because nobody else is going to do it for me, that's for sure.
Okay, well, I think that's probably going to have to do it. We are at 1 o'clock in the East, so I'd like to first thank Jennifer for giving this really informative webinar today for us. It's very much appreciated. And many of you are already signed up for Thursday, which is good to see. So we'll look forward to seeing many of you on Thursday. And until then, hope everybody has a good rest of the day. Thanks again. Bye now.